MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of Early Access Review, we are taking a look at the latest S-rank tech agent, Soldier Zero Anby, or I'm just gonna call her Sanby, right? So Sanby is gonna be an attack agent that introduces the aftershock mechanic alongside Paltra. The goal for Sanby is to stack on White Thunder to 3 stacks, use your skill, and you basically just rinse and repeat this, and you gain this 3 stacks of White Thunder either with your normal basic, your EX skill when you press and hold, or your ultimate, right? So her kit is actually extremely simplistic and very straightforward, making it a very good DPS for pretty much anyone to pick up. But if you can utilize her burst windows and you can play her more effectively, then her damage can actually go up by quite substantially, right? So we are going to be taking a look at her character kit, W engine, drive this, team comms, and without further ado, let's get into today's content. So for her character kit, Sanby's main gimmick is going to be the Silver Star mark as well as the White Thunder Aftershock. So every single one of Anby's attack, it applies the Silver Star mark, as you can see from this 3 triangular logo on the enemy unit in a sort of like a gauge, right? It's a kind of like a charge mechanic, charging individually up to 3 separate stacks, in which once you activate at 3 stacks, the mark will light up, right? So it's going to start flashing like a little bit yellow, and this is when you use your normal skill, not your EX, your normal skill, to ideally consume all 3 stacks of White Thunder, which would then trigger your aftershock damage, right? And triggering this to be 3 times is going to be extremely important for Sanby, because it will additionally cast Thunder Smite, where a lightning strike will fall on the enemy location to deal even more aftershock damage. So the mark itself is also going to be calculated separately for your different targets, but the trigger range of your normal skill is actually very wide, so it usually leads to you proccing the marks for pretty much every single enemy, even if they are not full at 3 stacks yet, right? So it's something to keep in mind. Aside from that, your ultimate and your EX skill, which is only going to be activated from your long pressing and holding your EX skill, it will fully charge your mark to 3 stacks, which this will be extremely crucial for Sanby's rotation, because it will drastically not just improve the uptime of 3 stacks, but it is kind of her kit where she's actually a on-field DPS that does burst damage, because you can charge this extremely fast and land in all of your buffs and debuffs to just do a tremendous amount of damage, especially during the time when the target is dazed, right? So you ideally want to use your EX skill as well as your ultimate immediately after you proc the 3 stacks from your normal build up from your basic attacks in order to gain the maximum value. So to improve this damage even further, using your supports buff uptime like your Evelyn, your Nicole, your Rina, your Lucy, or your Caesar King, during this time is gonna be giving you the best result, especially if they are dazed, right? And one last thing is that her range is actually pretty wide for normal minions, but she doesn't really have a very good grouping like Evelyn or ultra wide range like Miyabi. So me personally, I felt it was better dazing them and then you chain into Sanby for the damage dealing, especially when you deal with the mobs, right? For the minions, it is also not too feasible to build up to 3 stacks because they usually die in 1 or 2 stacks anyways, so you do want to clear them as fast as humanly possible. And a couple of keynotes I've noticed from a character kit is that for Sanby, she is extremely field time reliant, because you want to use her on field as much as possible to build up your silver mark, right? The star that you can trigger the gauge and everything, your energy for your EX skill to do another free 3 stacks, as well as your decibels for the ultimate, which once again ties it back to 3 stacks, right? So you can see that her kit, she is a on-field DPS that has a very strong burst window, especially if you intentionally accumulate your energy to max in order to burst swap with your usual 3 stack damages you would have gotten from your EX skill. So something, a similar combination, which would be using your basic attack to build up to 3 stacks, proc it with a normal skill, EX skill twice consecutively, and then ideally in this time, if you have your ultimate, use your ultimate as well, and by the time all this is done, you should have enough energy to swap into another EX. All of this time, if you can activate this during the time when the enemy is dazed, it will give you the highest amount of buff once you tie this in with your buffs as well as debuffs, right? So once again, she's an on-field DPS that has a burst damage window. So it's somewhat similar to like a combination of both Zhu Yuan as well as Evelyn, because her damage is not going to be very linear like Ellen, because she only gets an extremely high burst damage when you make use of your 3 stacks of White Thunder with all of the buffs and debuffs, and during the time if the enemy is dazed, you can get an even higher daze multiplier, right? Because you can actually store up her energy to as full as possible, and then you let everything go at one shot once you tie everything together, right? So that's going to be that. And then for Sanby's core skill, it also gives gives out a lot of additional damage values. So you can see it's 30% of her total crit damage increase, 10% crit rate, 25% damage against enemies with mark, which is basically a permanent uptime, as well as a 25% aftershock damage increase for all squad members. So for herself, for units like Paltra, or in the future Trigger, right? Another thing to note is that for Anby's dodge counter, another thing for Sanby is that dodge counters instead of parry counters with your teammates are actually going to be more preferred, such as, for example, our brand new unit Paltra, because during a perfect dodge counter, you can actually slow down time and you allow your Sanby to stack on more White Thunder, which means you can trigger this 3 stacks a little bit more frequently instead of the usual parry, right? And then one last note is that for your multi-targets, so if you are going to be using against her with like 2 different elites or like a group of mods, ideally you want to use your EX skill or your ultimate to instantly proc all 3 stacks for pretty much every single unit in that range, and then you can result in all of them getting the max 3 stacks, pop them off to deal the highest possible damage. Because if you don't do this, if you want to use basic attacks against multiple enemies, chances are you're most likely not going to be able to group them properly, which means that the other unit might not get the full 3 stacks for the additional Thunder Strike. So that is going to be that for Sanby's character kit as well as notes, right? And then jumping into the W engine, her signature weapon is going to give you a 48% base crit damage with an additional 30% crit damage under the refinements over there. And when the equiper lands a hit with a basic attack, special attack, or aftershock, you can gain 1 stack of buff, increasing my crit damage by 10% up to 3 times, which is going to be a 30% crit damage. And then when you do have all 3 stacks, it is going to increase your electric damage by 20%. So for Sanby's signature W engine, this is actually going to be a very good value, with most replacement at roughly 15% worse damage wise, right? So it does help you scale a lot higher, especially if you consider Sanby's core skill, which is going to be based off of her total crit damage anyways. So this W engine synergizes with her very well. Usually for most attack agents, standard signature W engine Brimstone, right, Soldier 11, they can cover most of the time, but the problem with this with Sanby is that she doesn't really get this buff uptime because your EX skill and skill are not considered as basic attacks, right? Which are going to be fundamental towards Sanby's burst window, especially during your daze phase. Because like I mentioned, the best way to output as much damage to Sanby is to stash all of your energy and let go of everything when the enemy is dazed. So during this time, ideally you wouldn't be using your base attack at all and just deal all of the damage from the EX skill and the ultimate, which means you are going to be losing the buff up time from the Brimstone, right? So that is something to consider. Everything else you can see from this chart over here from the CN community is going to be as a basis for comparison, right? So that is going to be that for the W engine. And then jumping into the build, Sanby actually has a very straightforward build, which is going to be involving the brand new Drive This deck, the 4-piece Shadow Harmony, best in slot up to 12% crit rate and attacks, right? With almost full uptime since it does have resets, right? Do factor this 12% crit rate when you're going to be building her with subsets, so you might want a little bit more focus on your crit damage. 4-piece Electric is also a viable alternative because 28% attack is still going to be a very strong buff, but you might not get this full buff coverage as well. So generally speaking, the brand new 4-piece is going to be her best in slot. For 2-piece, it's very flexible, right? Crit damage, crit rate, pen ratio, attack percentage, or electric, they're all with very minimal differences. All depends on what sort of drive this gets you the best crit ratio, right? Note that you do want to have a little bit more emphasis on crit damage so you can make use of Sanby's core skill as long as your crit ratio is going to be high enough, right? Keep in mind for all of your subsets and when you're going to be building Sanby to factor in your daily assault buffs, right? You can see from the past couple of times, daily assault does give us a lot of attack buff, damage buff, even crit damage buff. So try to balance this out if you want to really min-max your units, not just for Sanby, right? Then for the main slots, slot 4 is going to be crit damage or crit rate depending on what you're lagging. Slot 5, electric damage, pen ratio, attack percentage, all roughly the same depending on subsets. And finally, slot 6 is going to be your attack percentage. Then for the subsets, standard crit ratio over your attack percentage, that's pretty much going to be it, right? So that is a very straightforward build, and instantly jumping into our Mindscapes is going to be as well. For your M1, whenever your EX special hits an enemy, it will trigger the additional effect of your White Thunder 3 times, and this will consume all White Tiger stacks, and this will consume all of the stacks, right? So this is a roughly 11% final damage increase, basically increases the tempo of how quickly can you use your stacks, especially during your burst windows, right? Not too crazy of M1, I would say. Between M1 and S1, I would say S1 does have a higher value, right? Then for the M2, however, it's actually really good. So 12% crit rate increase, as well as getting this 6 stacks of Thunder's Cry. Every single time you want to use a special attack to trigger a stack, it will use this Thunder Cry instead. So in translation, it's basically a 12% crit rate, which means your slot 4 at this point should most likely be a crit damage main stat, which means you can gain even more scaling from your core skills, 30% total crit damage, right? Second half, it translates into 2 more full trigger of your White Thunder. for basically more burst damage, more EX specials. You basically can chain a lot more, and it scales a lot higher compared to the M1. So this M2 does have a pretty substantial value for Sanby, right? And then for the M4, honestly, it's also a pretty decent M4 because it does have a 12% ignore electric rest, which, as we know by now, is gonna be a different field of damage multiplier. So very nice. And finally, M6 standard big boom damage, you know, all in damage. It just makes her deal an absurd amount of damage. So pretty much gonna be that. So in summary, S1 is gonna be more important than M1, more than the M2, but do know that Sanby's M2 is going to be very powerful, right? And then finally, going into the team comps, for the support slot, Astra currently is going to be still the best in slot with the best synergy, built-in quick swap, chain attack on top of the highest number of buffs. If you don't have Astra, Caesar King is also a very decent second buffer because she also gives us quite a decent amount of buff. Also on top of that, giving us some comfort for Sanby whenever we're building stacks using our basic attack, because she does get hit pretty often, which means you get knocked out. So if you do have the shield, it helps us to keep up the pressure and continue the stack generation, right? Nicole, I do want to give a special mention, which is Nicole's damage amplification through her defense down can actually be a excellent choice for Sanby, and very good synergy because Nicole is sort of like a burst debuffer, and Sanby is sort of like a burst DPS, right? Especially if you stack on all of your EX skills with your ultimate, with your trigger windows. So during this downtime, especially if the target is dazed, letting go of Nicole's field, which lasts for roughly between 6 to 10 seconds, you can basically make full use of Sanby's rotations to gain the maximum value of this massive defense down, right? Keep in mind, this does require players to be a little bit more mindful of the buffs and debuffs applied to the enemy, right? And lastly, Rina is also going to be not too bad, especially at M1 for extended pen ratio buff, which may or may not interrupt your rotation if you're going to be using Sanby. You can also use your pen slot 5 for your main stat if you're going to be using Rina on your support slot. And then lastly, for our stun slot, Sanby really prefers a burst dazer or a all-field dazer like Paltra, because the field time requirement for Sanby is going to be extremely high. So as we have right now, we know in the upcoming banner, Trigger most likely would be the best in slot, but we're going to be waiting for the C server to see how they synergize with each other, right? But the aftershock synergy, all-field dazing, all this kind of stuff, it does look to be intended to be the perfect synergy for Sanby. Paltra, the free A rank which you can all get, is also extremely synergistic. She can apply daze and aftershock while being off-field, which is gonna be leading our Sanby on the field most of the time to generate all of her stacks, all of her energy, as well as all of her death builds, right? Keep in mind, we can also use Paltra's perfect counter for the free stacks of this additional aftershock in order to keep the pressure up against the enemy, right? Every other dazer like Qingyi, Lycon is not gonna be as comfortable because they also want to compete for field time. Coletta could be considered, but Paltra honestly is gonna be a very good A rank agent, especially using Sanby, and can kind of just run the team with a second slot on another side, right? So yeah, with that, we have come to the end of Sanby's early access review. Honestly, very straightforward, not too much to talk about over here. Basically, you want to make use of the burst windows, build up the stacks using your basic first, and then let go of an EX special whenever the enemy is gonna be reaching the daze, and then use the ultimate after all of your EX, and then the rotation kind of just repeats itself over using the relevant supports and dazers, right? Keep in mind, Sanby does prefer the enemy to reach daze as fast as possible so that she can actually use this huge burst window alongside with your buffs when the enemy is dazed, because keep in mind, the damage multiplier from the stun is going to be very important. Comparing this with other DPSs such as your Evelyn, your Miyabi, they definitely play very differently, because Sanby is going to be one of the first few DPS I've seen so far, which is both an on-field as well as a burst DPS combined into one. So it might not be as straightforward as compared to other DPS. Also, Aftershock is a brand new mechanic, so if they're going to be expanding this even further in the future, especially with units like Trigger, then we can see future growth potential for units like Sanby as well, right? So for players that are lacking a DPS, you skipped out on Miyabi, you didn't want to pull for Evelyn, Sanby is going to be an excellent choice for DPS for pretty much all of our end game content so far in Zenless Zone 0, right? So with that, we have come to the end of Sanby's early access review. Let me know in the comments below if you guys are going to be pulling for her. Word of the day is going to be twins. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join TikTok, enjoy Twitter. All the best for your guys' pulls. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.